Greetings, conference attendees. We are humbled to present at the TGfU 40th Anniversary Conference online. My name is Clancy Seymour. I'm the Associate Professor and Director of Health, Physical Education, and Sport Pedagogy at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York, in the United States. It's truly an honor to work with my colleagues on this project, who I will introduce. We have Dr. Mark Garrison, who is a Professor of Education and core doctoral research faculty at West Texas A&M University. Doc, please say hi.
How are you doing, everybody? Happy to be here.
Also joining us is Dr. Jeff Lindauer, who works with me at Canisius and wearing two hats at the college. He serves as an associate professor and the assistant vice president for academic affairs. Truly impressive, Jeff. I'm glad you've joined us today. Say hi, please.
Thanks, Clancy. Hello, everybody.
Our last colleague who's unable to join us today is the world-renowned GBA scholar, Dr. Steve Harvey, who's a professor and program coordinator at Ohio University. Welcome, Steve, and again, grateful to have you on this project. It is an honor to present our recent work entitled A Survey of New York State Physical Educators' Use of Game-Based Approaches in K-12 Physical Education. So, our goals for today are to detail some of the GBAs utilized in K-12 settings here in New York State. New York State is one of the top 5 states enrolled for children in the United States. As a Pete faculty member for nearly 20 years, in my experiences, multi-activity, or the famous skill and drill, continue to be the predominant model in middle and high school PE programs. And lastly, we hope attendees can make connections, including new avenues to explore with GBAs. I'll now pass it on to Jeff.
Thanks, Clancy, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone today. So as Clancy mentioned, that as Pete faculty, we became interested in this when we had intentional efforts to incorporate GBA into our Pete program. But yet when we went to observe our students, we didn't see very much evidence of them using GBAs in their teaching. And as we went out and observed and spent time in the schools, we saw a lot of multi-activity, and the way that looked in New York, and especially Western New York, was short units of 3 to 5 classes where you might see some drills and practice activities, but mostly gameplay at the middle and high school level, and a lot of full-sided gameplay. And as we know, that favors the higher skilled students, the athletic students, and it hinders those lower skilled students and marginalized students to be physically active for a lifetime. The other thing that, the other complication with this model was that we saw a lot of teacher-centered teaching styles. So not a lot of cognitive emphasis within the lessons to make students think and apply strategies and tactics. So we're seeing a lot of disengagement at the middle school and high school level, and that's why we became interested in doing a little bit more digging about game-based approaches for New York State physical educators.
Thanks, Jeff. So as we mentioned, we sought to investigate New York State physical educators' self-reported use of GBAs. The study was conducted during the 2020-21 and 2021-22 academic school years in New York State. We sent the survey to we attempted to survey PE teachers, and we sent the survey to nearly 2,000 members of our professional state association in New York State. That's the New York State Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, New York State AFERD. And while 174 PE professionals responded, only 88 respondents completed the full survey from start to finish. Results were analyzed using observation-oriented modeling, or OOM software. This was exciting, and instead of descriptive or inferential calculations, OOM relies on the examination of dominant patterns. And our expert, Dr. Mark Garrison, will now dive into some of our results and explain this more.
All right, greetings, everyone. So this table describes participant ratings of their confidence using 7 different game-centered approaches. So let's take a look. you can see that teaching games for understanding, respondents for our survey reported the most confidence in this area. Now, tactical game model and tactical decision learning model, these respondents reported the lowest level of confidence, and then you see a range in between that. You also notice that play practice has a fairly high, really pretty high or equal to almost level of confidence being reported by participants. And just a quick note on the representativeness of the survey, although only 88 people responded, for suburban and rural communities, as well as for white males and females, the survey proved to be pretty representative. And we'll recommend at the end of this that we focus more on urban areas in New York State, such as New York City or Buffalo and Rochester.
Awesome. Thanks, Doc. And one thing to keep in mind that's interesting about this slide is that all the physical educators were obviously pulled from New York State, and in teacher prep, many of our institutions, it seems likely, are probably teaching tactical games, and yet TGfU and play practice are being reported as widely used or confidence with experience. Awesome. Let's move on to the next one.
Now, one of the things we want to learn about is what type of games were participants spent the most time on. So we offered them a range of choices. As you can see, invasion games, we have the highest median response, right, in terms of time spent. So on average, 27% of folks said invasion games, whereas only about 14% said field striking games, which is your lowest. Now, you'll notice right below invasion games in terms of time spent is other activities that are not sport games, such as dance. Now, remember, the association we drew from also includes professionals who focus on in that area, so that may be of interest to some of the participants here.
Great stuff, Doc. And one more point to add to this is that while it seems plausible that invasion games might be the top reported category, the second most, or the next highest category, are other activities that are not sport games. And this is interesting, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that towards the end of our presentation today.
So one of the really key interests for the study was what people reported as their common or typical lesson sequence when teaching games. So we asked respondents to say, for your first activity, what do you typically do? For your second activity, what do you typically do? For your third activity, and so on. Here we see the most frequently selected activity for each lesson, and we'll point out to you that the most common two activities suggest a very traditional model of PE. Now here we have output from the observation-oriented modeling software that one shows you, if you look at the gray boxes, you'll see what we saw in the previous table. That is, 80 out of 88 respondents said, I start with warm-up and instant activity. 79 out of the 88 respondents said, I choose a skill-focused practice. This sequence is a pretty traditional sequence, especially when we're asking them about games-focused lessons. This occurred 90% of the time for our respondents. And you'll see there's a C value there in the bottom. This represents an estimate of how likely this would be if we randomized our data. And we can see that this pattern that you see with those gray boxes, it's very unlikely that this is due to randomness in the data, that this really reflects what the participants are actually reporting that they're doing in their classroom, assuming that reporting is accurate.
Fantastic, Doc. One point I'd like to add as well is we also tried to define some of these tasks for our lesson tasks for our respondents. So, for example, let's see, game-related practice included 2v1, 3v1, 4v2 tasks. Modified games were 1v1, 2v2, 3v2 tasks, but also included modifications to rules, conditions, and or equipment. And then last but not least, small-sided games were like 3v3 or 6v6 with modifications only to the players or the size of the playing surface.
All right, so here we have 4 examples. Using the software, we had our resident experts, our team here, design model GBA activities, right? So if we were doing professional development with PE teachers, we say, here's some ideas of what you can do for a game-based approach to teaching games. We have 4 models, and we asked the question, what percent of the time do individuals, and again, we're not using means here, we're actually looking at each individual and saying, how many individuals follow the pattern depicted in the gray boxes? What this shows us is that very few of the respondents are following model GCAs. Now, in the paper we're developing, we have more models, but here you can see fairly typical models of a GBA lesson sequence, and very few, the highest we have is 28% in the models that you see here are following a GBA lesson. Now, finally, the last thing we did is we looked at what are the relative emphasis among the 3 learning domains. So we know that typically we talk about the psychomotor, cognitive, and affective. Here you can see the psychomotor is by far the most emphasis among our participants, and cognitive receives the least emphasis. And that's also helpful in thinking about curriculum and professional development.
Thanks, Doc. And this, again, is an interesting finding because of the heavy reliance on questioning and inquiry techniques within GBA itself. So again, another interesting finding from these results. So what did we learn? What are the implications moving forward? Well, as Doc mentioned, despite the strong report of confidence, awareness, and use, it may be the case that respondents are not utilizing GBAs as they might think. What else have we, kind of discovered? PE professionals need more intentional PD and training to become, what some of the experts like Dr. Harvey and Dr. Ash Casey and others alike have said, to become more pedagogically fluent with GBAs. And then, as Dr. Garrison mentioned, given the size of New York State and the representativeness of our findings, it would be interesting to explore New York City as the largest school district in the United States and other urban districts like the city of Buffalo to learn more about the possibilities of GBAs moving forward. Doc or Jeff, anything to add to that? Pretty good?
You're good.
These are our references for you to explore and take a look further. And then just some parting words. Thank you for joining us today. And you see our contact information listed below. If you have any questions or would like to learn more, please get in touch. And thanks for joining us today. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great conference.
Yes, enjoy the conference indeed.